Hello, everyone. Welcome to SOAS China Humanities Research Seminar. My name is Xiaoning Lu. I am reader of modern Chinese culture and language. I'm also the convener of this research seminar series. So I'm very glad to welcome Dylan Ke Wang to give us a presentation on his wonderful MA dissertation. Dylan is currently our first year PhD student in China and Indo-Asia section. So today we will invite Dylan to give us about a 40 minutes presentation, and then he will share some tips on how to write a good MA dissertation. Afterwards, I will open the floor to you. So welcome to raise any questions. And this is a good opportunity for you to chat with each other, to ask a question for Dylan. Okay, without further ado, let's welcome Dylan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all very much for showing up. To begin with, I feel extremely honored to have been offered this opportunity to present my own MA dissertation, which I think is really rare, and I wish to express special thanks to my MA supervisor, Dr. Cosima Bruno, who is also, I feel very lucky to say, my current PhD supervisor. So now I'm gonna, without further ado, I'm gonna share my MA dissertation. So, okay, as you can see, this is the title of my dissertation: An Ideal Woman, Cross-Dressing and Homoerotic Desire in Modern Chinese Literature. It's a slightly unusual topic, and this dissertation is the final product of 3 or 4 years worth of reading and thinking. In the beginning, quite casual, then increasingly engaged, and culminating in a writing spree that lasted for 5 or 6 days, during which time I barely slept. And now here we are. We have this dissertation, and I'm gonna walk you through this project. So this whole idea all started when I stumbled upon this novella by the French author Balzac. This novella is included in Balzac's fiction sequence, The Human Comedy, which is a grand project. And in this project, this novella is not really noticeable, apart from the fact that Roland Barthes wrote a structural analysis of it in his wonderful book S/Z. So this story is actually very unusual. Basically, it tells of the dangerous liaison between a sculptor and a castrato singer. The castrato singer was this historical phenomenon, mostly in Italy, in Renaissance and early modern Italy, where a young male singer who performed female roles would be castrated at an early age, so as to preserve his tender voice. It was quite cruel, and but it did produce some sort of perverted beauty and fascination. So quite oblivious to what lies beneath the female finery, this sculptor finds in this castrato singer all the exquisite proportions, all the perfections of femininity. In spite of her evasive manner and vague warnings, he nonetheless initiates a relentless courtship of the soprano, which eventually leads to a painful revelation. Humiliated and infuriated, he makes to kill the singer with a sword, only to be struck down himself by the latter's protectors. So, having revealed the true identity of this singer, the narrator of the novella describes the singer as an artificial man, a specter, a ghost, a vampire, a phantasmagorical creature, all these ghostly metaphors. So reading this novella, it reminded me of some stories and other literary works on similar things that we find in 20th century Chinese literature. So as I thought about it over 2 or 3 years, a pattern slowly emerged. So here I think is worth quoting in full from my my dissertation. This is what I describe my research question, how I describe my research question. Interestingly, when the cross-dressed figure is safely confined within the invisible walls of the stage, he is indulged, idolized even. But when he ventures out into the real world, chaos invariably ensues. This situational logic characterizes most, if not all, narratives featuring the transvestite. He is typically portrayed as an intruder, dead set against the neat gender binarism of real man and woman. It is representation of such intrusions and attempted intrusions in modern Chinese literature that forms the subject of the current essay. So I have to make it very clear in the beginning that not all narratives featuring female impersonators in the theatrical sense, like count as as the cases I would consider, because the narrative featuring a female impersonator doesn't necessarily concern female impersonation itself. So I will talk about it later. So here you have this this picture of seemingly a very exquisite young lady in quite like a very fine traditional Chinese costume, and you can see obviously he has very fine features. So this artist was Mei Lanfang, arguably the most famous artist of 20th century China. So he is the ultimate maestro of speaking opera. He's basically synonymous with speaking opera right now. So female impersonation by male actors was common in China as early as the Song Dynasty, which was basically the 10th to the 13th century AD. And over the later centuries, there's the literati, the scholar official class developed a lasting fascination with Dan actors, aka female impersonators. So as pointed out by David Wang, strictly theatrical factors aside, the patronage of female impersonators partook of a strong erotic motivation. So some actors actually prostituted themselves on the side. So it was considered quite an elegant pursuit in traditional China, in late imperial China. But this situation profoundly changed with the founding of the Republic of China in 1912. So before the shift, men who pursued young male actors who performed female roles were considered elegant. It was considered an elegant taste and pursuit. After this shift, this practice started to be regarded as perverted and unacceptable, immoral. This trend also coincided with another trend that another orchestrated effort to cleanse and aestheticize the traditional Chinese theater, especially Peking opera. And Mei Lanfang was representative of this trend, of both trends. On the one hand, he distanced himself from any traditional theatrical decadence. Let's put it like that. On the other hand, he strived to elevate his art to an abstract and aesthetic level. but not everyone was happy with him. One of the widely considered the founding father of modern Chinese literature, Lu Xun, was quite harsh when he wrote about Mei Lanfang. So in a 1928 essay, Lu Xun wrote on Dan actors as such. We can see that it is the man who plays the part of a woman who causes the most anxiety, and yet it is the most prized, because female impersonation was quite fashionable at that time. People like Mei Lanfang were household names. This is because each of the two sexes sees this role as the opposite sex. Men see a woman being impersonated, and women see a man impersonating. Therefore, this type of photograph hangs eternally in the windows of our photography studios and in the minds of our citizens. The art that is the most noble, most eternal, most universal in China is the art of man impersonating women. It was quite bitter, quite harsh. And at some point in the same essay, he even compared Dan actors, female impersonators, to eunuchs. So obviously, he was quite worried that these effeminate entertainers, in his eyes, would be considered the artistic face of China, because in this way they may be considered a symbol of China's metaphorical castration in a world where only the fittest could survive. So it was a dog-eat-dog world in the first half of the 20th century, and China did suffer a lot. So it was Lu Xun's worry was justified, but he could not have predicted the kind of cultural significance Mei Lanfang would go on to exert. So here I quote from a Fox Movietone news story. So we still have Fox News with us, unfortunately, till this day. So at that time, Mei Lanfang successfully, actually phenomenally, toured the US, the USSR, and Japan in 1920s and 1930s, making him one of the most famous artists in the world, actually. So he mingled with people like Charlie Chaplin, with some of the most prominent Soviet directors and ballet dancers. So during his tour in America, Fox News shot a short video, a clip of his performance, and this video was prefixed by a short introduction given by this pompously dressed Chinese woman talking in English, introducing Mei Lanfang in English, and she said, "Mr. Mei Lanfang takes the part of women characters, but he's not a female impersonator according to the Western sense of the word. He does not attempt to imitate the real woman in nature, but through line and movement, he tries to create an ideal woman." And from this, I get the title of my dissertation. Now I'm going to show you the original video.
Mr. Mei Lanfang takes the part of women characters, but he is not a female impersonator, according to the Western sense of the word. He does not attempt to imitate the real woman in nature, but through line and movement, he tries to create an ideal woman.
And then you have this performance. Okay. This was this was probably one of his earliest appearance on the big screen. So you can see he was kind of nervous, but he was already in his mid-30s, but he still looked quite young, like almost like a teenager. Okay, so in a very uncanny way, despite a nationwide campaign to closet the transvestite within the invisible walls of the stage, he took refuge in literary imagination, and in the decades to come, he would periodically return to the public arena as an ideal woman, and Mei Lanfang would become a major inspiration for such representations. So I'm going to talk about 4 literary texts. So individually, each of these texts seems quite seems quite insignificant, but put together, they represent a minor but sizable tradition with their own shared motifs, themes, and critical heritage. So the first is a short story by one of the most important writers of modern Chinese fiction, Ba Jin. So this story is called A Second Mother. As you can see, it has a very complicated textual history, and I will talk about that later. So this story was first published in 1933, and largely the same account was given also in his autobiography, and then was rewritten and included in one of his most famous novels, Qiu, Autumn, and it was the second installment of the Turbulent Stream trilogy, 激流三部曲, and the first one, Jia Family, is arguably his most famous work. So this story is about this prepubescent boy who is also the narrator. So this boy was orphaned at an early age. So he's placed in the custody of a widowed uncle. He often feels very lonely and envies his page boy, who, despite living in utter poverty, always finds solace and pride in his loving mother. One night, his uncle, our protagonist's uncle, takes him to a local Sichuan opera theater. Sichuan is a part of China, where he meets a young man, clearly affectionate with his guardian, his uncle. The stranger takes an instant liking to the boy, who responds fondly and sits on his lap for the rest of the show. When it is time to bid farewell, he asks the boy, "You haven't called me anything yet. What do you think you should call me?" As if possessed, the child calls out, "Mother," tickling his uncle's fancy, but bringing the young man to tears. He subsequently takes the boy to his home and treats him to snacks while he goes about his own business. Impatient with waiting, the boy barges into the inner quarters. And here I quote, "No sooner had I entered the room than I was astonished by what I saw. A woman applying powder to her face while looking into the mirror. Yes, a woman. He wore a pink, tight-fitting outfit and a coiffure hung behind her neck. The man who had escorted me in was nowhere to be found." This woman, then tells a story. The 16-year-old boy sold himself to an opera troupe to provide for his destitute mother and youngest brother. And because of his good looks, he was forced to train in female roles. Heaven knows how many lashes he had sustained before he started to resemble a woman. Every day he used what a woman would use, wore what a woman would wear, and imitated the voice and gait of a woman. Once debuted, he proved an instant hit, but had to prostitute himself offstage to patrons to maintain his popularity. Such was the reality at that time. Some 10 years later, having been replaced by newcomers, he was redeemed by an old man. Henceforth, he changed many hands before ending up with the boy's uncle. Now it dawns on the boy that the well-groomed woman before him is none other than the actor in the story. I have completely become a woman, said the woman. I am but a woman, nothing more than a plaything. Then the boy recollects, her story came as a total surprise. Never in my wildest dreams could I have guessed the nature of her relationship to my uncle. However, rather than being scared or appalled, he embraces his second mother affectionately. This strange trio, his uncle, the boy, and this fake mother, subsequently start living together as a sort of a prototypical queer family. Until 2 years later, his uncle dies and he's separated from his new mother. So if Bajing had not recorded the same story in his autobiography, this story would certainly have been dismissed as the product of mere fantasy by critics. But because Bajing wrote and rewrote the same story 5 times, for as many as 5 times, you can see how obsessed he was with the theme, and we can also see and also like the second mother was actually based on a real character, a real person who a Sichuan opera female impersonator who dallied for a while with his uncle, and but in these different accounts, you can see a clear trend, because as he wrote and rewrote the story became less and less personal. The first story, all the different versions of it are quite personal and quite passionate. It was written in the first person, and in the latter 2 accounts, it is written in the third person, and none of the personal details, none of the outcries were retained in the latter versions. So interestingly, most critics would read this story as a social expose, as and consider the female impersonator as yet another victim of a bad social system. Indeed, it tallies well with Bajing, with the usual characterization of Bajing as a leftist writer. But to read the story as such would be to erase altogether the meaning of cross-dressing itself. In fact, this reading is partially belied by the protagonist's own conflicting sentiments. Toward the end of the story, while painfully aware that the actor's womanly manners were beaten into him, and proclaiming to devote his life to dismantling this repressive regime, the now adult narrator nonetheless longs for the return of his second mother. He says, "Now I have been freed from the fetters of family life and enjoy a considerable measure of liberty. Besides, I have grown into a strong young man. What I want the most is my second mother back, so that we could live as happily together as we did before, and that I could reciprocate the warmth she gave me. But where could I find her?" So even though he knew perfectly well that his second mother had been the product of an old, bad social system, he still longed for her return. So actually, when the actor first reveals his true sex to the boy and offers to demonstrate it by removing the fake coiffure, the boy actually refused. He said, "Leave it on. You have combed it so glossy. If you disturb it, you have to go through the trouble all over again." He is happy with the illusion, even though he knows the truth. Similarly, the actor readily accepts his new son, who reminds him of his long-lost younger brother. As a result, in this surreal scene, we have the boy tenderly calling out mother while the other replies with little brother. So in this way, theatrical cross-dressing, which was a repressive institution designed to trap man in alien gender and social roles, becomes a liberating force that allows lost souls to assume roles which otherwise would have been denied to them. So our understanding of the story is further complicated by his continuous rewriting of the story. Now we have at least 3 different texts of the story. So none of the earlier critics, here I list 4 of them: Bonnie McDougall, Kang Wenqing, Dan Chen, and David Wang, were all prestigious critics, but none of them have considered all 3 texts. So you can see what a complicated textual history this short story has. And but later on, the story was in a way suppressed by its own author, because he continued to rewrite it, thus this complex textual history. And the second version, so as I have just mentioned, in the first version, when the boy first meets his second mother, he was dressed as a man. But in the second version, he was dressed as a woman when they meet for the first time. And the third version, which was published after the founding of the foundation of the People's Republic, in this version, the second mother is a woman all along. So you can see clear signs of self-imposed censorship to avoid, the kind of criticism that ran rampant under the socialist regime. But in a very uncanny way, the second mother actually, with each rewriting, became more and more of a woman. And in the final version, it turned out he was a woman all along. So this is a very interesting byproduct of this self-imposed suppression. And in terms of its critical reception, most of these critics read it at a social expose, and they would actually avoid talking about the female impersonator per se. So the second text is yet another unusual piece of literary work. It's called Dear Husband, by this playwright called Ding Xilin. So interestingly, he actually studied physics and mathematics in the UK, but and later he became a professor of physics at Peking University. But because when he returned to China, it was the heyday of the literary revolution. So he tried his hand with writing plays, and he soon became famous. And because of his preferred genre, the one-act play, he was later dubbed master of the one-act play, 如木具圣手. And this Dear Husband, 亲爱的丈夫, first published in 1924, was actually perhaps his least famous work. So the story is also a very unusual one, but the plot is quite simple. The newly married wife, Mrs. Ren, deftly manages household affairs and treats the staff with respect and warmth. But rather suspiciously, he has slept alone behind locked doors ever since the wedding. On this fateful day, Yuan, a friend of Mr. Ren's, pays a visit to the newlyweds, during which it is revealed that Mrs. Ren is performed by Huang Fengqing, a famous Peking opera Dan actor. It is only towards the end that we are let into this secret, and the motive behind her masquerade. Early on, Mr. Ren attended a forum in Beijing on the topic, should men and women perform together in traditional Chinese opera? While many thought it more sensible for actors to play male roles and actresses to play female roles, he vehemently defended the necessity of preserving the time-honored tradition of female impersonation to the applause and cheers of the crowd. Having witnessed his gallantry and intelligence, she decided to marry him to repay his kindness. So this is basically the story. And very interestingly, we find in this character, Huang Fengqing, this female impersonator slash the wife, a combination of all kinds of female virtues, if we may say so. So in the final scene, she eagerly defended herself. Why did I come here? As if I've done any harm to you. In the 2 months I've been here, I've kept your house neat and clean. I've made your life more comfortable. I've kept your hair nicely trimmed, and I've kept your clothes fresh and tidy. Let me ask you, have I ever let you down? You've enjoyed the kind of happiness that even the newlyweds have never experienced, not to mention the love of a woman such that most men have never known. If you don't believe me, wait till you've married again. Once, twice, 10 times, even 100 times, and then you miss your first wife. Because although they can flatter you, serve you, obey you, depend on you, fear you, resent you, grieve over you, suffer over you, cry over you, or even sacrifice their life for you, but they can never love you as I do. And in the heat of the moment, she describes herself as a pure woman, an ideal woman. Now, here you see similar phrasing. So interestingly, she combines the best qualities of both the traditional woman and the new woman, and therefore possesses an ideal femininity. In the final scene, as Mr. Ren struggles to part with his pure and ideal wife, he even finds maternal comfort in her embrace. And he says, hold me in your arms and let me sleep a while. I've never slept in a woman's arms before. Apart from sleeping in my mother's arms when I was little, I'll fall asleep within 3 minutes. I won't know a thing while I'm asleep, just as if I were in my mom's arms. To this, Mrs. Ren replies, my poor child. This last exclamation can almost be read as an echo of the resounding cry of Lu Xun's madman. If you're familiar with his short story, A Madman's Diary, Save the Children. Paradoxically, only an artificial woman like her can enact all the different roles expected of the female sex in modern China. And they part, so in the end, they part their ways because the actor was called away by a powerful general to perform for his mother's birthday. So the masquerade was punctured. So this text was also suffered similar fate. So it was also suppressed over the later decades. So it was largely absent from all of his selected and collected works in almost 4 decades. So it was only after the Cultural Revolution that it was reprinted. And for the best of, as far as I know, it may have only been staged only once. So interestingly, some of Ding's works are still regularly staged, even to this day. Here you see a poster of one of the latest and finest production of some of his one-act plays put on by the prestigious Beijing Renmin Yishu Juyuan, Beijing People's Art Theater. So, but this particular play is nowhere to be found, and most of his contemporary critics dismissed this play as too unrealistic, far too removed from real life to be taken seriously, too bizarre, no more than a frivolous piece of writing with an idealistic and platonic vision of spiritual love, which is entirely unfounded in reality. It is a story fabricated out of thin air with no practical significance. It is too exaggerated and shows petite bourgeois taste. At the end of the day, we understand, because how could a man have lived with his bride for 2 months without realizing the truth of her sex? And later critics, for example, Kong Qingdong, a famous professor at Peking University, he tried to explain away the unusual theme of the play as a manifestation of Ding Xiling's aestheticist leanings. So, but either way, critics shun the topic of female impersonation per se. So you can see this text suffered similar fate as the aforementioned text. Then we come to perhaps the most well-known text featuring a female impersonator, Farewell My Concubine, because of the film adaptation's quick colonization. So this novel, 霸王别姬, Farewell My Concubine, it also has a very complicated textual history, but I should not dwell on it here because it's not really relevant. So the author Li Bihua is based in Hong Kong. Lillian Li is her English name, and the novel. This story was first written in 1981 as the script for a 2-episode miniseries produced in Hong Kong, and then she rewrote it into a novel in 1985, and then she revised it and incorporated some of the details from the movie script, which she co-wrote with a mainland playwright. So the film adaptation, Farewell My Concubine, was released in 1993. So the story is by now a very familiar one. But I need to say something about the long gap between this text and the former text. So, to borrow Elaine Showalter's famous description of the fin de siècle, the early Republican era was characterized by sexual anarchy. It was a time when issues as sensitive as premarital sex, homosexuality, and even sadomasochism were open to debate. Some went as far as to call for official affirmation and institutionalization of same-sex love. So it was this relatively permissive environment that made it possible for Ba Jing and Ding Xiling to publish their highly unorthodox works, even though both texts were to be subsequently suppressed. But the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949 marked a watershed in Chinese history in every possible sense, and not least in terms of public discourse on sex and sexuality. So naturally, examples of cross-dressing between 1950 and the end of the 1980s in Chinese fiction, cinema, and theater are few and unobtrusive. So more recently, even though films and literary works with a forbidden theme have enjoyed a growing underground, almost cult-like following, representation of sexual minorities is still banned in mainstream media. But there exists a glaring anomaly, and it is none other than this film, especially this film. And the novel has also been published in the mainland, and is still in print, very much in print. And it is noteworthy that the late Leslie Chong, Zhang Guorong, who played the main character Cheng Bieyi in the film, is perhaps the only the only widely acclaimed and accepted openly gay character in mainland China. So you can see the influence of this film and this novel. So the story is by now a very familiar one. So, but for the sake of my discussion, I'll just discuss it in. I'll just summarize it very briefly. So, Beiping, 1929, which was what Beijing was known as that time. Xiao Douzi, little Bing, is sold by his mother, an unlicensed prostitute, into a bonded apprenticeship with Master Guan to train as a Dan actor. While Xiao Shito, little Stone, is training for leading male roles. The two boys soon become intimate as they look out for each other in the harsh environment of the troupe, where they observe rigorous discipline and receive daily beatings. But Xiao Douzi's feelings for Xiao Shito grow far beyond the limits of friendship. After years of ruthless training, they become the most popular Peking opera singers in Beijing under the stage names Cheng Dieyi and Duan Xiaolou. They always perform together and enjoy equal shares of fame until Xiaolou becomes enamored with Ju Xian, a prostitute determined to leave her life at the brothel. Henceforth, the torturous entanglements between the trio are played out against the grand backdrop of China's tumultuous modern history. This love triangle culminates during the Cultural Revolution when Ju Xian commits suicide and the other two are separated. Dieyi and Xiaolou eventually reunite in Hong Kong, to which the latter has fled from the mainland, but fail to reconcile with each other and their history. The story ends with Dieyi returning to Beijing, leaving Xiaolou to live out the rest of his days in the strange city. So Chen Kaige's film adaptation more or less follows the same storyline, except for the ending. So in the film, by the time the Cultural Revolution has already ended, Dieyi and Xiaolou reunite to rehearse the play that has made them famous, Farewell, My Concubine, the tragic story of the legendary beauty Yu Ji, concubine Yu, who followed her lord Ba Wang, the hegemon king, in death. When his character is supposed to commit suicide, Dieyi kills himself on stage with a real sword. Thus ends the film version. So, I'll talk about this first. So, similarly, this story was also suffered suppression, and so when it was released in mainland China in 1993, it was immediately banned supposedly for 3 reasons, according to a relatively reliable report. So because its depiction of homosexuality and revolutionary violence, and most importantly, because of its pessimistic ending, because Dieyi only commits suicide when the Cultural Revolution has ended and the new era has just begun. So why would he do that? Some people attacked Chen Kaige for this because they think that this is just, this is politically incorrect, if not outright counter-revolutionary. But Chen Kaige, at an event to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the film, he said, this ending was fiercely criticized at the time. Some thought it politically incorrect. Otherwise, why would he commit suicide after the Cultural Revolution has already ended? Dieyi's death has nothing to do with politics. He acts out the story of an individual. My interest lies only in individuals. History and politics merely serve as a misty background for vivid characters. But unfortunately, it seems that his disclaimer has seldom been heeded, and most critics rather stubbornly read the story as a national allegory. For example, I've mentioned some of the more important critics in this respect. So they have very stubbornly they insist on reading the story as a national allegory rather than the story of a very special individual. So I would argue that um, Farewell My Concubine is essentially a record of Dieyi's lifelong struggle to cross the invisible fourth wall and to claim a place in real life for his stage persona. So because this story is a very familiar one, so I would just talk about it very briefly. So in the first half, I think, in the first half of the novel or the film, I think it meticulously records the process of a woman being made, an artificial woman being made. First, I'm sure you remember the scene where his mom cut off his sixth finger, which was obviously a symbolic castration. And then we have the scene where each student, each apprentice was assigned a role type in Peking opera, and because he kept confounding, the lines of his monologue, which should go, "I am by nature a tender maiden, not a handsome lad," but he, kept saying, "I am by nature a handsome lad, not a tender maiden," which is quite, a very brilliant choice, and it's very it's symbolic of his gender confusion, and because he couldn't get it right, so his Master Guan thrust a burning pipe into his mouth and jerked back and forth several times until his mouth started to fill with blood. So obviously it can be read as a symbolic penetration, almost a rite of passage of some kind. And then we have the scene where Dieyi was bullied by some of his fellow apprentices, and Xiaolou very gallantly rescued him, and in the process hurting himself on the forehead. And at this point, in the novel we have the following description. So Xiaolou gallantly stands up for him, shouting at the delinquents like the hegemon king, and accidentally hurting himself during the skirmish. So afterwards, Xiaolou, Dieyi lovingly wraps up his friend's head, his hands weaving through the air in the stylized movements of the opera without his realizing it. For the first time, he starts to confound reality with the theater. Now we have his transformation complete. So, and then he goes on to find his real hegemon king. So, so I would not dwell upon the rest of the story because of the limited time. So, but like if you have watched the film, it's quite obvious because he tried to make Xiaolou his real hegemon king, but failed, and he used Yuan Siye, that sort of the kind of politician, kind of local thug, let's say, as a substitute, and it all proved futile in the end, of course. So, and in the end, when he killed himself, he actually, for a split second, he managed to fuse reality and theater. So, in a sense, he did manage to become the real Yu Ji, albeit for a split second. So the interesting thing is, we see a lot of parallels between Dieyi and Mei Lanfang. The most obvious one being the awkward hand patterns, because what with the symbolic castration and stuff like that, Dieyi's hands became a very important symbol for his female beauty. And this was obviously influenced by Mei Lanfang because he almost single-handedly developed the skill the technique of orchid hand patterns, 兰花指, into one of the most intricate, exquisite techniques of Peking opera Dan acting, female impersonation. One of his advisors, Qi Rushan, recorded as many as 53 different patterns. And but other than that, we have these Mei Lanfang, the real life inspiration for Cheng Dieyi, Mei Lanfang, is actually almost posed apart. They're almost like posed apart from each other. So on the one hand, Mei Lanfang was he very consciously tried to heterosexualize his own image, and his marriage and later divorce from another a very famous Peking opera actress, Meng Xiaodong, caused a national sensation and portrayed him as a indisputably heterosexual at the price of a scandal. But Dieyi, on the other hand, is simply appalled by the idea of relations with women. You can find, traces everywhere. And then we have politics, patriotism. So in order to save Xiaolou, Dieyi would perform for the Japanese, even though not unwillingly, and stands trial for treason as a result. He said, "No one forced me. I did it out of my own free will. Art does not recognize the limits of nationalities." In reality, Mei Lanfang refused to perform for the invaders and famously grew a mustache as a symbol of patriotism and masculinity. More importantly, unlike Dieyi, who consistently blurs the distinction between theatricality and reality, Mei Lanfang had learned early on to manage his on and off-stage roles with great dexterity. On the stage, he reconstructed the cross-dressed femininity of Peking opera heroines as purely formal and artistic expressions. Off the stage, he and his advisors consciously managed his public image to resist any association with homosexual patronage, foregrounding his relations with his wives and children. So in Lu Xun's words, Mei was monopolized by the literati and placed under a glass cover. So now you see, even though there are some surface resemblance, the author has actually cunningly designed the character of Dieyi as the opposite of Mei Lanfang, and he in this way she explored some of the possibilities that would have been impossible in reality. And now you have like a handful of the numerous hand patterns of Mei recorded in 1930s. You can see all of them have specific purpose, and every single one is different. So now you can see how formal and abstract Mei Lanfang's performance actually was. Now here you have Leslie Chong in the film. Isn't he just gorgeous? Okay, here you have this actor is named Wen Ruhua. He actually taught Leslie Chong to perform Peking opera during the shooting of the film. And this photo, this is me. This photo was taken almost 3 years ago after a performance in Beijing. So he's already in his mid-70s. Doesn't he just look he's still gorgeous and is still a marvelous performer. I'm sure you still remember the unusual story of the scholar with the fake wife from Dear Husband. At that time, I have mentioned every single contemporary critic dismissed it as unrealistic and ridiculous. No one could have predicted that something like that could actually happen in real life, but it did occur, and the scandal broke out in 1986, involving two people, a Chinese person, Shi Peipu, and a French national, Bernard Boucicault. So this is one of the numerous accounts, news reports, and here I quote from the New York Times. A former French diplomat and a Chinese opera singer have been sentenced to 6 years in jail for spying for China after a 2-day trial that traced a story of clandestine love and mistaken sexual identity. Mr. Boucicault was accused of passing information to China after he fell in love with Mr. Shi, whom he believed for 20 years to be a woman. So for the details of this case, I highly suggest you read one of the many biographical accounts. Some of them are quite good and detailed. This is a picture from the trial. But the thing is, a playwright, a very important Chinese-American playwright, David Henry Huang, actually wrote a play based on this called M. Butterfly, and the famous director David Cronenberg adapted this into a film starring Zun Long, another very famous Hong Kong-based actor. So this story is similar to the ones we have already discussed, but has some extra dimensions. So the play starts with a French diplomat, here renamed Gallimard, in his prison cell, and through a series of flashbacks tells the story of his decades-long love affair with Song Liling, the Peking opera singer. He first meets her at a diplomatic residence in Beijing, where he performs the death scene from Puccini's opera Madame Butterfly. Unaware of the convention of female impersonation in Chinese opera, Gallimard assumes that she is a woman and eagerly compliments her. But she was quite cool and punctured his rather Orientalist fantasy. But she invites him to watch Peking opera to expand his mind. Afterwards, however, Song starts to deliberately play up to Gallimard's vision by enacting the submissive native mistress. In the meantime, the unattractive, timid Gallimard soon becomes this new aggressive, confident thing, and even gets promoted from a mere accountant to vice consul. The first act ends with him finalizing his conquest by forcing Song to admit that she really is his butterfly. If you are familiar with the story of the opera, you would know what that means. It's a very like today it may seem quite disturbing. So the second half of the play sees their role reversed. Since none of his predictions about the situation in Indochina have come true, Gallimard is sent back to France, where Song Liling joins him. She persuades him to become a government courier and pass acquired intelligence on to the Chinese embassy. Before long, they are found out and tried. Song then ostentatiously removes his kimono, wig, makeup on stage, and appears for the first time as a man in an Armani suit. But how could he have fooled a man into believing he was a real woman? Asks the judge on behalf of the audience. Song claims to have adhered to 2 rules. Rule number 1, men always believe what they want to hear. Rule 2, the West has sort of an international rape mentality towards the East. Her mouth says no, but her eyes say yes. But how? How could he have fooled him for almost 20 years? Here is his answer. The West thinks of itself as masculine, big guns, big industry, big money. So the East is feminine, weak, delicate, poor, but good at art and full of inscrutable wisdom, the feminine mystique. Her mouth says no, but her eyes say yes. The West believes the East, deep down, wants to be dominated because a woman can't think for herself. You expect Oriental countries to submit to your guns, and you expect Oriental women to be submissive to your men. That's why you say they make the best wives. So in Gallimard's imagination, sexism and racism intersect with each other, as well as with imperialist and colonialist fantasies in conjuring up this perfect woman. Little does he expect that he himself would turn out to be the butterfly in this story. As the final act draws to an end, Song strips himself naked to show what is underneath, just a man. Gallimard then proceeds to put on the kimono and wig Song has discarded, and make up his face in the traditional Japanese style. As the love duet blares over the speakers, he performs seppuku, plunging a knife into his body while declaring, "My name is René Gallimard, also known as Madame Butterfly." The curtain falls on Song calling out, "Butterfly, butterfly." So you see the power dynamic reversed in the final scene. As Gallimard, unlike this final story has an extra dimension to it, because now we have the we're also dealing with the power dynamic between the East and the West. So now we have 4 stories. Here you have the female impersonator in this film. Here is the 2 of them on their way to the trial, both in suits. So you can see how Gallimard is avoiding the sight of him. And here you have the final scene where Gallimard himself puts on the makeup and becomes the butterfly. Okay, here we have 4 stories. So now I'm going to more or less read the final bit of my dissertation and come to a close. So true, as bemoaned by Lu Xun, the female impersonator in his prime beguiles both sexes. His admirers and worshippers had all misplaced their love, for who was he? Man loved him as a woman, woman loved him as a man, but who was he? Die muses. I used to fascinate both men and women. What I was and what they were didn't matter. Shipeipu brag. Yet underneath this double fascination lurks a potential double abhorrence. Sooner or later, man would also see a man impersonating. Remember Saracen's disgust, Mr. Ren's torture, and Gallimard's astonishment at the moment of revelation. Woman, too, would see a woman being impersonated. Bear in mind Ju Xian's lifelong jealousy. When safely confined within the invisible walls of the stage, the man who plays the part of a woman is indulged, idolized even, but is not allowed to occupy a place among the common man and woman in the mortal realm. Remember how the castrato singer narrowly escapes being hacked in twain. Mrs. Ren hurriedly returns to the stage. For his final act of suicide, Die only barters a slice of reality the size of a sword's edge for the duration of a split second. Only the boy in Ba Jing's story, as yet untainted by notions of rigid binarism, embraces the actor as his real mother. Even so, it does not last. The heart of the matter lies in the cross-dresser's very ambiguity and undecidability, a signifier for which common man and woman struggle to find the signified, and which they self-righteously read as absence and therefore a lack of value. With a cunning flourish of metonymy, his accusers, the transvestite accusers, literalize this supposed barrenness as his infertility, for he is doubly sterile. Literally castrated or figuratively emasculated, he forfeits the right to impregnate in addition to being unable to bear children. So, so we have, so this paragraph is a little bit long, so I wouldn't read the whole thing. So now we have a tradition emerging. So we can see all these stories share similar themes. And you know, an attempt on the female impersonator's part to cross the invisible wall of the stage into reality. And we have similar imagery and language. We have theater, ideal, perfect woman, ghost, specter, butterfly even. Because butterfly is a symbol for transformation in Chinese culture. Because we have die, die simply means butterfly, so die means butterfly clothes. And the fourth work is called Butterfly. And we have something about pregnancy. And we have the same reference point, Mei Lan Fang. We have this, all the texts suffered similar fates, the subsequent suppression, including censorship, self-censorship, and critical dismission. More importantly, as pointed out by Marjorie Garber, again and again, the central figure of the story, the transvestite, is looked through or away from, appropriated to tell another kind of story, a story less disturbing or dangerous because less problematic and undecidable. So, I think we're running out of time, so I'm gonna just stop here. But interestingly, I'll end with this remark. Song Liling, in the final story, manages not only to undertake cross-dressing successfully as a not only manages to undertake cross-dressing successfully as a constant rather than an episodic activity, an accomplishment her predecessors would envy, but also prove Lu Xun wrong as she turns the tables on the Westerner, thus reversing the perennial power dynamics between the weak feminine Orient and the strong masculine West. As it turns out, the art of man impersonating women really is the most noble, most eternal, and most universal of arts in China. Curtain. Okay, so that's the most of the content on my dissertation.
Yes, so Dylan, thank you very much. I just want to thank you for this very enthusiastic and beautiful presentation. I'd like to read the comments from the two markers of Dylan's dissertation. And so the first marker gives such comment. Oh, by the way, Dylan, could you please turn off share screen?
Okay.
Okay, good. So the first marker says, this is an excellent dissertation. It is original, well written, inventively structured, engaging, and sophisticated. It shows optimal research skills and a great ability to analyze text, both literary and otherwise, from an oblique angle. You accurately selected and closely read these 4 works, highlighting unexpected echoes and parallel motifs. You expertly conduct the reader through the selected text and let her gauge the line of your argument effortlessly and convincingly. Up until the last section, you wisely refrain from any overt critique of the idealized woman transvestite in terms of queer theory. Nevertheless, you offer abundant information for a kaleidoscopic picture of this figure in literature and theory. And the second marker offers the following comment. This is a highly original dissertation demonstrating the student's excellent research skills and analytical ability, as well as broad knowledge of modern Chinese literature and culture. Focusing on the transvestite figure and the male homoerotic desire, the dissertation examines 4 modern Chinese literary texts, 2 were obscure and 2 were known. Through an engaging analysis, it recovers and constructs a minor literary tradition in modern China. More importantly, it points out the transvestite figure can be construed as the third space of possibility, an innovative way of linking gender to nation building that departs from the trite women and the nation perspective. So I think the dissertation is very rich, and I wonder whether Dylan can talk more about the tips to writing. I can't hear you. You have muted.
Okay. Since I have already spent too much time on the content, I'll be very brief about this part. So, first, I think it's very important to have the right theoretical framework. For mine, I borrowed from Marjorie Garber's vested interest, cross-dressing, and counter anxiety. Her ideas of category crisis, which lies at the heart of all kinds of human categories, including the gender binarism and third space of possibility, and also Michel Foucault's the true sex beneath ambiguous appearances, as expounded in his excellent introduction to Herculine Barben, the autobiography of this very unusual figure in French history. So I think it's very important to find the right theoretical framework, but you don't. But it shouldn't be forced. It should be appropriate, but you should also adapt it to suit the materials rather than bend the materials to suit the theoretical framework. So that's very important. Then it's very important to draw the threads together to present all the materials as a whole. So I have used my text, the Saracen, to do this. For example, in the Prelude, I used this text to basically transition. So this is the last paragraph of the Prelude. Towards the end of Saracen, we read this reassuring message. As a conclusion to this story, fairly well known in Italy, I can offer you a consoling idea of the progress that contemporary civilization has achieved. They no longer make those wretched creatures there. Well, not so easily done. Much like the specter of communism, the transvestite phantom would go on to haunt China, as all the powers of new China entered into a secular alliance to exorcise him. So this is a parody of the famous beginning line of the Communist Manifesto. So I have used this text to draw the motives together. And then I have also used Lu Xun's criticism of the mainland Fang. So I begin with Lu Xun and I also end with Lu Xun. So this is the beginning, the art. So that famous sentence of Lu Xun's. But in the end, I end with Lu Xun's quote. It's rather ironic, but also sort of draw all the threads together. So it looks very neat, and which is what I want my writing to look like, because it deals with literary text. So I want it to be slightly literary, but not too like pedantic. Then I have also resorted to the use of epigraphs, and so like here you have the Prelude. You have this sentence from the short video, An Ideal Woman, and then the second chapter, another sentence from the text, a woman, yes, a pure woman, an ideal woman. Then the second mother, I have completely become a woman. I am but a woman, nothing more than a plaything. Then farewell, I concubine. I am by nature a tender maiden, not a handsome lad. Then the epilogue. Why can't anyone understand that in China I once was loved by, very simply, the perfect woman? When all these things come together, you see a striking thread, like you see a striking sort of heritage. So I think with all these epigraphs, I have managed to really draw the threads together. And then I have also being very careful with the use of meta discourse so as to direct my readers through the discussion. For example, at the beginning of chapter 1, I said, as the curtain rises, because I was mimicking the working of the theater, because it deals largely with theatrical performance. So I try to mimic the workings of a theater in the presentation of my dissertation. So in the beginning, I said, as the curtain rises, we first come to Chengdu, the bustling provincial capital of Sichuan in the early years of the 20th century. then the presentation is also very important. For example, like in the end, I put this rather pretentious curtain, so as to complete the illusion of theatricality. So, and also because the last one is something I have really, that is really, at least to me, very experimental, because also potentially risky, because obviously all these stories can't all share the same motifs. But I want to present I want to give my readers the impression that there are strong connections, but but obviously they don't all share exactly the same motif. So I've decided to present sort of like a montage. Like, for example, like this paragraph I've just read, true as bemoaned by Lu Xun, the female impersonator in his prime beguiles both sexes. Then here's a quote from Die Yi, then a quote from Shi Peibu. So these two, I think these would be enough to support this statement. Then I go on to say, yet underneath this double fascination lurks a potential double abhorrence. Sooner or later, man would also see a man impersonating. Remember, I give the examples of Saracen, Mr. Ren from Dear Husband, and Gallimard from M. Butterfly. And then lastly, woman too would see a woman being impersonated. Bear in mind Ju Xian's lifelong jealousy from Farewell, I'm a Concubine. So in this way, I think I've managed to give the reader the impression that all these stories are intricately connected with each other. And I do this in almost 2 pages. I have written almost 2 pages consisting of this sort of like a montage of images. So this is what perhaps the most experimental and risky bit I did. So thank you very much. And as a like personal as a small advertisement, so this is a book I co-translated with a dozen scholars. So it's a new literary history of modern China, edited by the Harvard professor David Wang. So I'm one of the translators of the Chinese version, newly published in Taiwan. So if you are interested, please. It's a very fascinating book. It's very unusual. You can either read the English original or the Chinese translation. It's taken years to produce. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dylan. We have some questions here. One is from Juliet. Is there specific guidelines for the module dissertation in Chinese studies that we can refer to in addition to SOAS handbook? Juliet, my short answer is no, because we do have students working on dissertation cross-disciplinary on different topics. We have students work on political science topic and history topic, and Dylan's one is on literary history. So I think the one most important requirement is you need to use Chinese language source, and then you need to present a coherent and a clear argument. Any other questions? Oh, Jingfei. Okay, Jingfei, why don't you ask by yourself? You can turn on your camera. You're muted, Jingfei. Jingfei, you are muted. What happened to your mic? I can't hear you. Let's see what's going on. Can you unmute yourself, Jingfei? Otherwise, I'm going to ask on your behalf. Thank you, Dylan. I wonder if you can share your schedule for writing. This is a very good question, very practical. How long did it take you to write the proposal, to design the structure of the essay, and to write it? Dylan, you're muted. Sorry, don't unmute yourself. Dylan, are you back? What happened? Do we have some technical problem now?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Okay, good.
Okay, sorry. Something went wrong. So technically, it took me about I'm the biggest so
Procrastinator.
Yeah, sorry, I procrastinate a lot. So I actually wrote this thing in about 6 days or a week, I think. But the thing is, I've been thinking about it for a very long time before I was ready to set it down. So I have been thinking about, as I mentioned in the beginning, I have been thinking about this topic for 3 or 4 years by the time I started writing. So I have everything at hand at that time. So I've already done all the primary research, and I've already thought through the whole process. So this might be a little bit unusual, and I'm not sure it would be the best example to follow, but I do think you should start thinking as early as possible. I don't think the writing process particularly would take that long, but you have, at least for me, I always have to think it through and I also have to spend a long time doing the primary research and making notes and think about especially the presentation of the whole thing. So it almost like the most of the time I spend on this part of the writing process, but the actual writing may not take that long, actually.
Yeah, I hasten to add, Dylan's project is highly unusual because I've been marking master dissertation for years, and his dissertation is awarded 86 or 87. Yeah, it's very, very high, very unusual. But you can also tell from his presentation, he has been preparing this project for years. So he has a tremendous amount of material. And in the end, he also he managed to create a very experimental form of dissertation, very unlike the standard academic essay. So it's very literal, it has a unique quality. I also praised him for not writing like a craftsman. The language is quite lyrical as well. So it's really a pleasure to read. So I wonder whether you have other questions. Any questions? Oh, if you'd like to raise your hand, feel free to say so. Tianren, would you like to ask about yourself, if you can unmute yourself? Oh, okay. So you just have a comment. Thank you, Dylan. Great lecture. Okay. If anybody has a specific question, please feel free to ask. Oh, excuse me. Anybody has a specific question? Okay. So I hope this talk is helpful to you. I'm going to end the formal session. If you'd like to stay behind to have an informal chat, you're more than welcome to do so. So I'm going to stop recording.